they condemn it themselves. This comes from the very words of the architects of the DSM. And so in this case, they say, we're decades away from being able to really pinpoint the physiological cause. No, you're not decades away.
It'll never happen, right?
Infinitely away, yes. It will never happen. Because why? You can't image the soul. In 1953, Pope Pius XII addressed the Fifth International Congress of Psychotherapy and Clinical Psychology. While the Pope encouraged the psychological sciences, he also issued a shot across the bow, telling the Congress, "Be assured that the Church follows your research." Pius XII also recognized the potential pitfalls of the endeavor, saying, "You labor on a terrain that is very difficult."
40 years later, and Pope John Paul II addressed the World Psychiatric Association and the American Psychiatric Association.
The human person is a unity of body and spirit, possessing an inviolable dignity as one made in the image of God.
John Paul then admonished both associations, asserting that
no genuine therapy or treatment for psychic disturbances can ever conflict with the moral obligation of the patient to pursue the truth and to grow in virtue.
Despite these warnings, Catholics have allowed the Church to be infiltrated by the mental health industry and its erroneous and harmful conceptualizations.
So when speaking of the Catholic faith and mental health, a question mark should be there, indicating that the term mental health is not only ambiguous, but misleading. The question mark also suggests that with the mental health system's theories and aims that shut out God and the soul, there can be no true integration of the Catholic understanding of the human person, both for his maturation on the natural level and his sanctification on the supernatural level. In fact, the Catholic understanding of human nature and the purpose of human existence is diametrically opposed to that of the commonly accepted and dominant mental health system, which denies grace and free will. Let's examine the term mental health, also known as behavioral health. Mental or behavioral health refers to a person thinking or acting rightly. But the standard for thinking or acting rightly, according to the mental health professions, is of course disordered because it ignores the reality that human beings are composed of a physical body and a spiritual soul. Of course, this rejection of the immortal soul is truly illogical and unreasonable. The reality that our existence does not end in this earthly life was held by the earliest philosophers.
All men's souls are immortal.
The soul is the form of the body.
Returning to the mental health system and its practitioners, their conceptualization and practices are all based on external manifestations of mental or behavioral irregularities, and their standards of normalcy are opposed to timeless natural and divine laws. For instance, the American Psychological Association, or APA, formally thanked the Supreme Court for legalizing the murder of the unborn, an atrocious so-called right the APA had been lobbying for throughout the 60s. At the same time the APA affirmed child murder, it did the same for homosexuality, declaring it not a mental illness, which it was always understood as. Indeed, the latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM, which is the Bible for the mental health system, now has 7 different definitions relating to gender, including gender expression and gender identity, which are defined as
the specific ways in which individuals enact gender roles provided in their societies. An individual's identification as male, female, or occasionally some category other than male or female.
Well, this is one of the problems with this left-wing gender ideology, is that no one who espouses it can even tell you what these words mean. Like, what is a woman?
Well,
can you tell me what a woman is?
No, I can't.
Bearing this in mind, the mental health profession, which celebrates abortion, homosexuality, and transgenderism, judges any behavior through its own incorrect secular lens.
People think of transgender as being a mental illness, and it's not. It's a part of the natural, normal spectrum of human sexuality.
That is, when somebody's not acting normally according to mental health standards, it refers to anything from the socially inappropriate to the bizarrely psychotic. So a person is deemed to have a so-called mental disorder because he's either not thinking or acting rightly. But a person's thoughts and actions do not begin and end in themselves, as the mental health system proposes. Rather, they're a manifestation of the moral and spiritual realm, the realm of reason and truth, the realm of choice and of love. Certainly there are organic neurological irregularities that can cause uncontrolled disturbances of sense perception and of brain processing and responsivity. Such neurological irregularities are present in everyone to lesser or greater degrees and can range anywhere from learning disabilities to severe intellectual disabilities. And there are physiological ills that can cause uncontrolled bodily perceptions and behaviors.
Any person is susceptible to seeing or hearing things that aren't there, that are not in accord with reality. Such is the frailty of the human brain, such is the limitations of the flesh and man's incarnational status. Such is the weakness of fallen human nature. But before analyzing what exactly mental disorder is, some fundamental definitions and distinctions need to be made.
Mental is the intersect of brain and soul. The intellectual powers come from the soul, and the brain provides the physical conduit. Unlike angelic beings, the human person is limited by his flesh in his apprehension of reality and assent to truth. It is this assent to truth and subsequent choosing of the good that marks the truly human, that specifies man as in the analogous image of God. Mental health professions refer to the entirety of mental health clinical practices, both the disciplines and the specific professions, such as psychology, psychiatry, counseling, addiction treatment, and so on. The mental health profession and all of its practitioners statutorily fall under the total control of the mental health system. Mental health system refers to the complex that controls all services, practices, and clinical disciplines that claim anything relating to mental or behavioral health. The mental health system is controlled by the state, heavily influenced by the insurance and pharmaceutical industries. This system entails a multifaceted bureaucracy that controls every major institution: education, news, politics, health, entertainment, and all the rest. Psyche means soul. The terms psychology and psychiatry mean, respectively, the study of the soul and the treatment of the soul. These terms have been co-opted and the definitions twisted as the mental health profession rejects the existence of the soul. As such, the mental health system has been able to eviscerate psychology and psychiatry of their very meanings. In short, the mental health system has, statutorily speaking, stolen the soul. Psychomoral refers specifically to the human process of assenting to truth and choosing the good. Psychomoralytics deals with clinical interventions within the psychomoral realm of the proper understanding of man. Psychomoralytics is the antidotal response to the mental health system's desouling of psychology and psychiatry. In complete opposition to these definitions and distinctions is the mental health system, which reduces the human person to a soulless, spiritless, and non-transcendent animal. And this is why the mental health system holds a biological basis for mental health disorders. The human person is nothing more than a biological entity, and this is the very philosophical foundation for the mental health system. This egregious belief is not only the overriding academic orientation of the mental health system's professions, but a mandate enforced in the most real and practical terms on those professions.
So even if a patient or a practitioner with authentic religious or philosophical beliefs does not assent to the mental health system's incorrect view of the human person, the system mandates they view, for diagnostic and reimbursement purposes, the human person as nothing more than a soulless, biological entity.
John B. Watson, one of the pioneers of modern psychology, proves this point well when he not only compares human beings to animals, but equates them.
The behaviorist, in his efforts to get a unitary scheme of animal response, recognizes no dividing line between man and brute.
That's from Watson's 1913 manifesto on behaviorism, which is the psychological approach taught in virtually every psychology class. Turning to the modern-day mental health system, its incapability to properly diagnose and treat comes from its invalid nosology, or the classification of diseases. The nosology of the mental health professions is formally presented in the DSM, but again, the DSM mental health nosology, or classification and diagnosis of so-called mental disorder, is based solely on the criteria of a constellation of symptoms. If you have enough of the checklist symptoms, you have the disorder. Such a nosology is tantamount to quackery by the very standards of the medical model the DSM claims to adhere to.
True medical science, on the other hand, classifies disease as per its pathogenesis, or how it develops, and better still, on its etiology, that is, on its actual origin or cause, which is the gold standard of medical nosology.
The mental health conceptualization is utterly incapable of providing a valid nosology of causation because it is only symptom-based, be these symptoms thinking wrongly or acting wrongly, and thus the mental health professions are, at best, relegated to only dampening down symptoms. They're totally incapable of providing an actual cure for the causative factors. Although President Bush declared the 1990s to be the decade of the brain, thanks to electronic neuroimaging, which promised great new revelations, it was not to be so. Regardless of any future advances in technology, there will not be, because there can never be, a great revelation as to the biological basis of symptomatic mental disordering, which is what the mental health system that runs every major institution is based on. Symptomatic mental disorder does not have a biological basis, but rather a psychomoral one, found in a soul-deep etiology which examines the actual cause of illness and disorder. Here's the very architect of the DSM-4, Dr. Michael B. First, looking not to reality and philosophy for answers, but rather material technological advancement.
A primary purpose was to determine why progress has been so limited, and to offer strategic insights that may lead to a more etiologically based diagnostic system. The group ultimately concluded that given the current state of technological limitations, the field is years and possibly decades away from having a fully explicated etiology and pathophysiology-based classification system for psychiatry.
And it could be a billion years, and they will never discover the causes of so-called mental disorder, because the immaterial soul cannot be imaged, no matter the technology, but only understood philosophically. But still, hope springs eternal for the high priests of mental health, so Dr. First goes on to say, with nothing less than a blind faith, that
undoubtedly there are neurobiological and genetic causes for all mental disorders, but they are still beyond our understanding.
Why undoubtedly? Because the mental health field is but a sample of a dogmatically materialistic Western intelligentsia. Nonetheless, the high priests of the mental health system must admit that there is no tangible material evidence as to the cause of mental disorder. And this glaring lack of material evidence should in itself be an empirical and undeniable clue that suggests that the cause is not material or biological at all.
All right, Dr. Dilsaver, thank you so much for being with us today. And welcome to Church Militant Studios. It's great to have you here. Now, we were talking before the show. Unfortunately, I think it's a big injustice to who you are and the work that you do, that more people in the Catholic world really don't know much about you. You know, you have your Catholic celebrity psychologists out there, and they have their call-in shows on Catholic Talk Radio and whatnot, but who is Dr. G.C. Dilsaver? Kind of how did you get into the mental health field, and how did that culminate into your system of psychomoralytics that we're going to get into?
My education, and this was after a stint in the Marine Corps and after a philosophy degree, the St. Ignatius Institute at USF, the Great Books program. I came to to the study of psychology after teaching in Catholic schools, and my understanding that these children and their families needed deeper intervention. And so that is what drew me to the study of psychology. Now, previously to that too, I had a master's degree in marriage and family theology. So that marriage and family issue had always been an urgent one for me. And of course, in the marriage and in the family, that is where that psychomoralytic process takes place on a natural level or not. And so our job as a psychomoralist is to augment and facilitate that maturation process that would occur naturally within that family.
So your system of psychomoralytics, you're saying this is really the antidote to what's going on in the modern psychological industry, let's call it. You know, the title of today's episode is, Are You Crazy? Now it's, kind of tongue in cheek, you're not crazy, I'm not crazy, but it almost seems, ironically enough, that the mental health industry is crazy, like it's gone off the rails. And you have a lot of experience with this, going through school, studying, and then working as a practitioner. Basically, for the layman out there, what would you say? What's wrong with the mental health industry, and how can your system of psychomoralytics counteract that?
So if we go back to that training, before I studied psychology, I was firmly inculcated in the Catholic worldview, militantly so. After college, I was in the Marine Corps, and you need to be militant to be Catholic in the Marine Corps. So when I came to the study of psychology, I had an attitude, and I wasn't about to ante up any truths of the Holy Faith. And so I was able to synthesize then, during that process, both by rejecting falsehood and by putting in its place the truths of an adequate anthropology. And that's what I did during the graduate program. I developed this and worked on it, and by the grace of God, it all unfolded. And it wasn't too difficult, but I didn't have to make anything up. All I had to do was be true to that truth, the fundamental principles of who it means to be human on the natural level, and then with the added light of our holy faith that illuminates those dark areas, that makes connections where you can't do that just with unaided reason. It's like a cheat sheet. And that was, by the grace of God, allowed me to develop this while in grad school. However, of course, the mental health system, you ask what's wrong with it, it has rejected traditional Western morality. It has no adequate anthropology of the human person. It sees the human person as a soulless entity. And as such, it is a purveyor of perversity. It works against the traditional family. It works against an individual's informed conscience. And so, therefore, it actually does exacerbate, if you will, craziness.
Okay, so doctor, you're talking about an adequate anthropology, really meaning the study of who man is at his core. And for Catholics, and really for all people, we understand man as this composite of body and soul. And you said that the mental health industry, the current industry, rejects all that. They see man as just this mere body. So to see man as this soulless creature, as you say, is really inadequate. How have you seen that play out, in terms of your education? Like, what were you taught? Did they try to push this on you? And, describe a little bit about that. Did you reject it? And then how did that play into your practice as well?
Well, coming to this study of psychology after a lot of life experience, I already had a young family, a growing, and I was still somewhat of an anomaly for those graduate students because the vast majority of them went from high school to undergrad, studied psychology, got good grades, and went to grad school. Were they prepared to question the validity of the mental health system? No. They were jumping through hoops. That's how the system works. You drink the Kool-Aid so you can get your doctorate, you can get your license, and then you're in the system. and you go from there. But on my case, of course, I had that education background, the philosophical background that allowed me to be moored in truth and therefore able to distinguish what was false and what was true in my studies. And there's so much fluff there in psychology. It's become such a soft science that, if you will, someone like me is usually weeded out. So that leads to, I think, the really deeper story here is this guidance of God Almighty under the auspices of our Blessed Mother, going through grad school, being persona non grata, just because I was a strong militant Catholic. I had a Catholic family raising children. I was not of the norm. So I had to actually excel so that I could make it through the program, because they may not like me, but they can't argue with results. So the Blessed Mother, to put it quite simply, parted the Red Sea for me time and time again. As I was doing this, I never did the mental health system. I was always practicing psychoanalytics, even in a undeveloped form, which is about ego abnegation, about dying to yourself, which is diametrically opposed to the mental health system, which is about ego aggrandizement, building yourself up. So I was through grad school, I was seeing patients, I'm in hospital internships, and I'm doing psychoanalytics. If my supervisors had known that, that would be it. I'd be out. There's no way. Oh, it's good to feel bad about yourself. What? Humiliation is good. What? That's heresy in the mental health system. I was able to do that. Let's give you one example of what happened. When I was in grad school, the second year you start seeing patients. And then you have the supervisors every year, and every semester, different supervisors that check your work and listen to your tapes, whatever. My supervisor was a neuropsychologist who could care less about psychotherapy. So I'd sit in there and I would talk with him and we'd just shoot the breeze for 50 minutes. Somehow, some quirk in the system, I had that psychologist for my supervisor the entire time I was in grad school. So I never had anybody really going deeply into what I was doing psychotherapeutically. It was, again, under the aegis of our Blessed Mother, I was able to get through this.
What are some of the reactions of maybe your contemporaries in the field, other doctors to your system? And then also, too, what are some of the reactions of your patients? We have a lot of people have been through counseling with different psychologists. Some have been medicated. Some have had bad experiences with counselors. When they come to you, what's their reaction? They say, "Oh, this is something new, and it works."
If you look at the practitioners, a phenomenon that happens in graduate school, a lot of times, if they have this intellectual honesty, some sort of philosophical clarity, they're going to start questioning the system, and then they're going to start also seeing that it's not efficacious. There's no results. People don't get better. So what do? In the middle of grad school, your second, third year of grad school, what are you going to do? You're going to stay the course, and you're just going to push through. Some may leave. Of course, they don't get into the system either. So those people are part of that system. They're invested in it. And you can't buck the system, because if you buck the system, they're going to take away your licensure. They coerce you into following their line. So who is going to do that when their livelihood is at stake? When they've invested 12 years into their doctoral programs, undergrad, graduate school, internship. Very few would have the courage to do that. Now, some people have, and this is interesting. I have practitioners that left the field years ago because they were disillusioned. And then they hear about psychoanalytics and go, "Oh, this is what I always wanted to do." And they come back. You're not going to find somebody that's in the system that's going to really have the courage to say, "I'm going to just leave on my own accord, to go to this." Rather, you're going to have people disillusioned with the system. And the same thing with the patients. They have been disillusioned. They see it's not efficacious. because their practitioners tell them it's chronic. You're going to have this for the rest of your life. There's nothing you can do about it. And you don't have to worry about doing anything about it because it's just brain chemistry, so it's not a big deal. But they know it's a big deal because they're wreaking havoc in their lives, in their marriages, in their families, in their ability to live life. So they're still desperately seeking a cure or a solution. And so they see psychoanalytics, and then if they're Catholic or Christian, they say, wow, this is also congruent with my spirituality.
Now, we talk about a lot of people having different experiences in the psychological world. Before they come to you, they get, whatever modern psychology is telling them. And one of the things it does tell them is that it's all about symptoms, right? That's the be-all and end-all cure of whatever's ailing them. So this symptomology, as you call it, I want you to kind of break this open. Why does the modern health industry, why does the modern psychological health industry rely so heavily on the symptoms?
What you're referring to is nosology, or classification of diseases. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, which is the Bible of the mental health system, and which entails the nosology. So it will list a disease, mental illness, mental disorder, and it's going to have criteria. These criteria are all symptoms. If you have these symptoms, therefore you have major depression, or you have schizophrenia, or you have obsessive compulsive disorder. But these are a constellation of symptoms, and they're diagnosing you purely on symptomology, on overt things. Now, people are impressed by that sometimes. Wow, you just described my symptoms. That's not hard to do. That's just obvious. But then they say, your depression, for instance, is due to a lack of serotonin between the synapses, and that's why you're depressed. So we're going to give you medication for that. So see, now symptoms, they diagnose you, but now they say the cause of it is an imbalance of brain chemistry. That's pure theory. They have no science behind that. It's just what they posit as a placeholder, because they have no idea.
Right, because there's no test for it, right?
No test.
If I thought you had serotonin levels that were too low, I couldn't, prick your finger and say, oh yeah, there they are. That doesn't exist, correct?
It does not exist. And they have no way of measuring that. They still don't. Even with all the magnetic brain imagery.
That's something I want to talk about too, the neuroelectric imaging of the brain, which is, wonderful technology, but it seems like there's too great of a promise there. Like we think that's going to solve it all, and it really hasn't, right? Because this technology has existed for how long, and really what fruits have we seen from it?
It really boomed when it was declared the decade of the brain by Bush 1. So there was lots of hope in the field. Oh, we're going to see now. We're going to see it. We're going to see the cause of mental disorder. And they admit, no. The architects of the DSM admit. And you asked me how many actually have criticized the system. Some very top prominent psychiatrists and psychologists have done so in moments of honesty, and they condemn it themselves. This comes from the very words of the architects of the DSM. And so in this case, they say, we're decades away from being able to really pinpoint the physiological cause. No, you're not decades away.
It'll never happen, right?
Infinitely away, yes. It will never happen. Because why? You can't image the soul.
Right. They're just solely focusing on that material component. And where do you think that thinking came from? Is it just bad philosophy? Is it, behaviorists like John B. Watson, who we mentioned in the episode? Where does this thinking, this almost secularism that's creeped its way into psychology come from?
Well, it comes from the overall culture and overall Western civilization, what's happened there. I mean, it's happened in every field. Now, psychology, it is much more urgent because psychology is the study of the soul. So it's not as if, okay, I have my anesthesiologist is an atheist.
He's just concerned with your body, right?
Right. I'm not too concerned if he's an atheist or not, although I might try to preach the gospel to him.
Might convert him. Yeah, we'll see.
But in that case, it's not that pertinent. But for the study of the soul, absolutely. You have to have a mooring in solid anthropology, philosophy. And that means a natural law. And so our whole culture has rejected natural law, part and parcel with its rejection of the gospel. So if we have a culture that has turned from Christ, is anti-Christic, it's not remanded back to the way it was in pre-Christian times, no. Because in pre-Christian times, they were in touch with natural law. They were in touch with the vicissitudes of existence. And that's why they were so receptive to the gospel, the redemption of the cross. Today, with the rejection of Christ and the cross, there's also a rejection of reality. And in place of true philosophy and true theology is this political correctness, which is the overriding anti-Christic worldview. And it permeates everything in our culture and all the power structures, including the mental health system.
So it almost seems like the mental health system has set itself up as kind of like a parallel religion. You know, it's got its own dogmas. And that's, you have no soul, you're just a material. It's got its heretics, you know, like yourself, that say, no, there is a soul, and morality is this God-given thing, and we need to tap into that. How then do we fight back? Because it seems like this huge bureaucratic machine that incorporates all this other stuff, education, media, all this. How do we fight back against this?
Against this juggernaut. It's ubiquitous. I say counteroffensive. That's what psychomoralics is, a counteroffensive. The mental health system infiltrated our culture and the Catholic Church. It was the Trojan horse. It was the camel that got its nose under the tent, and supplanted traditional Christian spirituality and philosophy with this reductionistic worldview. So, and this is applicable to church militant, how is it then that the dioceses, the chanceries, these bishops, are only offering this poisonous Catholic charities, which is neither Catholic nor charitable, that practices this purely secular psychology, that is an arm of the welfare state, the secular welfare, and if you will, satanic state, the deep state. So we could start with the Catholic Church, which is going to be always the leader for any good that's going to happen in the world. The Catholic Church, let's start implementing a true psychology in the diocese. Let's have the faithful demand it from their bishops. Instead of giving us poisons, give us the true thing that's totally congruent with the Holy Faith. So it's a counteroffensive. We can not only retake that aspect of the church, but it's also going to have ramifications in a larger way. In fact, we can actually have a counteroffensive into the secular realm as well, because this applies not just for Catholics or Christians, it applies to all human beings. So we can actually go out there then with this and offer this superlative psychology, and when the efficacy is shown, when it's shown to be superior and vastly superior to the mental health systems, and you can do that through the empirical studies, it could be all right there, then they're going to say too, wow, this comes from a Catholic worldview. So that is a proof in the pudding that Catholicism is true.
So it's almost like an evangelical tool as well. It's a way for people to get interested in obeying the natural law, but then the question is, well, where does the natural law come from? It comes from God, and here's His church. Come on in.
That's exactly right. And interestingly enough, when I'm working with people, they may not be Catholic, they can just be Christian. Sometimes I even have people come to me that they think they're atheists or they claim to be atheists. But if they undergo this process, and once you're in touch with natural law, once you're in touch with this reality of this existence, they are primed for the gospel. Once you accept the fact that life is crucifixion, life is a meat grinder, you run to Christ crucified.
So it's really that image of Jesus in the garden during His agony, right? So when someone walks into you and they present their problems to you, and they're looking for you to kind of affirm them and say, yeah, you're fine, everything's okay. But you do just the opposite, right? You say, no, it's not your will. Your own comfort, your own expectations. It's the will of your Heavenly Father.
Exactly right. This is a huge issue. And for Catholics, I want them to realize God's ways are not their ways. Because that hurts. God's ways are not my ways. They're humiliating. They're sorrowful. This is a valley of tears. We're mourning and weeping. But then I'm going to choose to say yes to it for love of you, God. It's love, but you're all good and deserve all my love. I may feel damned. I may feel lost, but I can always love God. I can always choose to love God. Yeah, I can even choose to love God when I feel damned, when it's dark. It's through that aspect of love. And so in the psychomoralic process, we take people through this process of being able to be receptive to the real, assent to the truth, and choose the good. And that all ends to love, because you choose the truth and you love it as a good.
And that's a truly human act. All right, Dr. Dilsaver, we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to joining you in future episodes.